Hey, welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Hope you've been having a great, stellar week thus far. If it's your first time tuning in, my name is Salvador Briggman. And on this show, we talk about crowdfunding. Now, there are lots of different types of crowdfunding. So there obviously is like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, GoFundMe, nonprofit fundraising, that kind of stuff. There's also a different flavor of crowdfunding that's called equity crowdfunding. Now, equity crowdfunding is a newer thing, but basically you can raise money for a startup company from ordinary, non-accredited investors. You can do it online. You can actually create Facebook ads and put out marketing content saying that you're going to be raising funds for your actual startup company. It's kind of interesting because it's similar to Kickstarter in that people, if they want to, they can pre-order your service, they can pre-order your product, but in addition, they're also getting a small amount of equity in your company. So that could be something simple like they're only investing $100, let's just say, in your company. They're getting your widget or your gadget, and they're also becoming an investor in your company. However, you also obviously have much larger investors, people putting in $2,000, $5,000, or even $10,000 into a company. It really depends on that individual investor, obviously. So this is a whole new thing. I call it Kickstarter for equity, right? It's basically that kind of a formula where it's a limited fundraising duration and you can raise upwards of $1,070,000 under regulation crowdfunding of the Jobs Act. Now, I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you, and that's because I wrote this book called Equity Crowdfunding Explained, which goes step by step into how to run an equity crowdfunding campaign, some of the best platforms out there, some of the resources you should know. And also, if you're an investor, you want to invest in startup companies, this book will also guide you through the process of doing that. So that's interesting to you. I'm going to link you to the Audible version here on the podcast, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about today's interview. So first of all, the Audible version for the Equity Crowdfunding Explained is crowdcrux.com/equity audio. That is crowdcrux.com/equity audio, crowdcrux.com/equity audio. That link will take you to the Audible version of Equity Crowdfunding Explained. I believe you can get a free trial of Audible, and you'll also get a free copy of that book. The other quick thing I want to say before we dive into today's interview is that I actually did the interview with the guys behind Vansanity. So this is basically cloud med spas. They're doctors and nurses who rent medical workspaces. It really makes me think of cloud kitchens. If you're not familiar with cloud kitchens, the founder of Uber decided to start his own new company kind of based around this idea of cloud kitchens, where you can just, as a food startup, you can rent space from this guy, almost similar to WeWork, but instead it's more of like an industrial kitchen space. And there's no customer serving that happens in that environment. So basically, the people who are running these cloud kitchens, they're just renting space over the course of time, let's just say per month, and then they're selling their services, they're selling their products, they're selling the food on places like Grubhub, on Seamless, on Uber Eats. So it's a really interesting model that I think has really become a lot more popular, but this is kind of applying that model to doctors and nurses so they can rent medical workspace. Because obviously a doctor and nurse is not always going to need to use sophisticated technology or all of the equipment and gear. It's really going to vary from patient to patient. So this way they can cut down their expenses a lot. And this is what Vansanity aims to do with their cloud med spas. So you're going to hear a little bit about, number one, how the entrepreneur was able to raise over $490,000 on WeFunder with an equity crowdfunding campaign. You're going to hear about some of his advice and tips for other startup entrepreneurs out there who want to raise money under this new regulation crowdfunding. And finally, what you got to do if you want to be successful with one of these campaigns. This podcast episode is coming up right after this. This podcast episode is sponsored by The Gadget Flow. The Gadget Flow reaches over 28 million people, and they've been around since 2012. They are Indiegogo and Kickstarter experts. They featured over 5,000 crowdfunding campaigns, and if you have a technology or design campaign, it is a great platform to generate awareness and get backers. You can check them out at thegadgetflow.com/submit and list your project today. Hey guys, welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Today we're speaking with the founder of a WeFunder campaign that has raised over $300,000. Incredible. And they have a really interesting product. I'm going to let the founder here, Ignacio, tell you a little bit about that. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Salvador. It's really great being here. I appreciate it. Well, our company is Vansanity. It's based in Boston, Massachusetts. And I know it sounds buzzy, but it's cloud med spas. People may have heard of cloud kitchens. We're a similar concept for medical aesthetics, where practitioners can rent rooms, capital equipment, and a variety of things by the hour so that it's always profitable for them.
So in terms of how someone would use that, would it be kind of like a doctor needs an office, or like could you just kind of flesh that out for me?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to make the intro bite-sized, but yeah, so a nurse practitioner, a physician's assistant, or a doctor, and you need to have a medical director if you're not an MD. But they would have their own patient roster, and a lot of these folks already do. And but they don't have the capital or the desire to build out their own office space or to work for someone else. And so they can just rent rooms, a treatment room. There's chairs. There's all the accoutrement other than prescription products, and they can rent lasers and other equipment so that they can do treatments for their patients.
And otherwise, they'd have to buy all of that equipment, I'm
Yeah, and
assuming.
some of the top laser we have is it costs more than $250,000, and a top med spa you can speak to a variety of consultants, but a top med spa will take you $750,000 to $1 million to outfit properly.
Interesting. Very cool.
Yeah.
So when it comes to, let's start a little bit with like your story here, because
Mhm.
you obviously had some great success in your past. Maybe you can just tell listeners some of the other businesses that you've done. I know like shopping.com was like a pretty big one you were involved with. Can you just share a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was involved with that from one of the first handful of employees, all the way through IPO, and then with Goldman Sachs, and then shortly after that, we sold to eBay for just under $700 million, and that whole journey was about 6-7 years. I played a variety of roles from head of revenue to the president of the company, CFO, etc. And that roadshow was just a total blast. It was unbelievably exciting. The whole journey was. I got to say, after having worked for large companies, I got hooked on startups and small companies, and the level of control and the amount that your contribution, if you're really motivated and passionate, can drive amazing success.
Has most of your career been in e-commerce thus far?
No, I've done a variety of things. So shopping.com was e-commerce, and then I did work on another ad tech product, and then I worked on a healthcare product. It was called Lively. We eventually sold to a company called Great Call that sold to Best Buy shortly after we sold to them. Think of it as an Apple Watch for seniors. So you've probably heard that commercial, "Help! I've fallen, I can't get up."
Mm-hmm.
But the thing you wear around your neck looks a lot like a garage door opener, and so as a result, nobody wears it. So we came out with this product literally 2 months. We launched it 2 months before Apple Watch, and so it had a very similar aesthetic to it. But you would push a button on it, and it would call for emergency, just like it would with "Help! I've fallen, I can't get up." But we were trying to do it in a stylish and aesthetically pleasing way so that you would have a much higher compliance rate.
Oh,
Um,
I see. Interesting. And then when it comes to Vansanity, like where did the idea even start for that? Because that seems very different way of thinking about like rentals, and it just seems very disruptive.
yeah, well, thank you. So the idea came from, I guess, all creativity to me is really kind of connecting dots from different spheres of life. So I had several friends, but one in particular who was a surgeon in the Bay Area. I moved from the Bay Area to Boston little under 2 years ago, and he told me about his tribulations, if you will, built thinking about how to practice medicine. He loved medicine. He loved the practice of medicine, but the business of medicine, partnerships, practices, working for hospitals, employees, capital equipment leasing, furniture, HR, accounting, all that stuff, all those hassles were just a complete, you know, roadblock to success. And so I was thinking to myself, well, what if we could kind of eliminate those roadblocks? And I, started digging deeper. And I encourage all entrepreneurs to really do their research on the product and the industry they're in. And as I kind of looked at the various verticals in healthcare, it didn't seem like the greatest sort of, classic human benefit. But I actually can talk about that separately or later about why I think this is a great category. But let's leave that aside for now. What I saw were a lot of characteristics where we could um, comfortably and easily in this niche uh, really help practitioners. First of all, it was a really fast growing and large category. I thought it was relatively small, but it's already about $12 billion, medical aesthetics, and it's still growing at 11 or
Jeez.
yeah,
Wow.
and it's still growing 11 or 12% a year. So 15 years ago, you'd never heard of it, but Botox and lasers and cool sculpting and all these things have come out in the last 10 or 15 years. It's just an explosive category. And then the second thing about it was really high fixed cost. These machines, these spas are really expensive to build out and to get the capital to start them up. The third thing was that the relationship, and I think you'll appreciate this with another analogy, the relationship between the practitioner and the patient is super tight. It's not unlike haircuts or hairstyling. I know when I lived in the Bay Area, I went from place to place because my hairstylist kept moving.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so
Definitely.
I didn't really have a lot of loyalty to the establishment or the physical location, but to the practitioner. And that the same dynamic exists with medical aesthetics. And
Yeah.
so then I saw a statistic that blew me away. So the hair care industry is $45 billion, but 20% of it, just over $9 billion, is what's called booth rentals. So you may have heard of this. I'd heard of it anecdotally, but I had no idea it was that big. That hairstylist will rent a chair from a salon and bring their own customers to them. So they're just renting out the space. And I was like, well, this category has all the same characteristics, but much bigger revenue, much bigger margins, much bigger opportunity. And then I'll combine that with hearing about gig workers. And I always thought gig workers, like I feel like terribly that these folks are making 12, 15, 20 bucks an hour. But when I speak to them, when I take a car or whatever, what I hear from them consistently, and I mean like 90% of the time, the reason they do it is flexibility because they control their own hours.
Mm.
So I literally thought to myself, well, geez, if we could combine complete flexibility, no capital upfront cost, and they can earn hundreds, literally hundreds of dollars an hour from their client base, that's got to be a winner. And
Yeah,
that,
definitely. And you're not even using some of the equipment all the time, right? So it
yeah,
makes a lot more sense doing
yeah,
it that way.
exactly. You just spread out those fixed costs across many, many users.
So you've basically had experience raising capital the traditional way, right?
Yep.
And selling companies and these things. How is equity crowdfunding different? Actually, how did you even find out about equity crowdfunding?
Yeah, so I had one friend who was doing it, and then a friend of one of my partners, Mike, has done it a couple times with WeFunder. So we went and spoke to them and saw the pros and cons, and I said, you know what, if we needed to raise 5 or 10 million now, that's probably not the right place to go. But we need to raise 500,000, give or take, or a little bit more to get to the next step, and that's product market fit. That elusive PMF, or what I like to say is really just kind of the hunt for profitability. Because if you're profitable and it's scalable, you've got something really pretty cool. I have a mantra. I say you have to be impatient for profitability, which is really impatient for product market fit. And then once you have that, then you have to be impatient for growth. But to get to product market fit, I think you can do it with a reasonably low amount of capital. And we're in a pretty capital intensive business with real estate and equipment, but we can keep it really lean, prove that it works, and then we can take it to the next stage where we scale it up.
And by product market fit, you're referring to the whole lean startup methodology, right?
Yeah, exactly. That you have enough customers. I guess it's two things. Customers are singing your praises, and I'd say they're getting you new customers. They're kind of a source of marketing, and more importantly, the retention rate is super high. If retention is high and your customers are evangelists, you've got a really big winner on your hands. People talk about network effects, and so it's natural. If you're in a network effects business, you want more people on the network because it helps you as a person. Like a
Mhm.
Facebook, I'd rather have my friends on it. But in this case, it's just like they just love it so much, Vansanity, and they're doing so well on it. They tell their friends about it and say, you could do it too.
Well said. So when it comes to the equity crowdfunding campaign, you've raised 350K.
Yeah.
Where is that coming from? Is that coming from WeFunder? Is that coming from social media, your network? Like, where are those people finding you?
Well, it's only been a couple of weeks, I guess. The vast majority has been our own outreach to date, but we're just going to start pumping the social media over the next 3 to 4 weeks. And now, because we've reached a certain threshold, WeFunder is going to help accelerate that through their promotional stuff to their users, their investors, and then also I think doing some paid media for us as well. So that's the advice I got, and it's proven to be really great. That when you go to a WeFunder, the most important, well, you need to have a good idea, a good pitch, but then maybe the most important thing is momentum, to show people that there's other folks behind this. You're not jumping out on a limb by yourself. So
Are those kind of the people in your network that would have participated in like a Regulation D, except now you're doing it online? Is that kind of how that
Well,
works?
it's twofold. So there's been a handful who are accredited investors and would have invested anyway. But then there's a lot of ones, twos, fives, and tens that aren't accredited investors. So they wouldn't have been able to participate, but only can do it because of the Jobs Act. And so that's much easier to organize through a site like WeFunder.
Interesting. So it's kind of like people who have seen your success in your career can now actually participate, right? So it
Yeah.
can not only like cheer you along, but now they're also getting a piece of the pie.
And also, we have a handful of our practitioners are also investing. So that's even more exciting. That here's a person who's using our service, loves what it's doing for their business and for their own financial rewards. And then they're saying, you know what, I believe in it so much, I'm going to invest in the company as well. In fact, that was one of the really nice surprises. There's a section on WeFunder called Grapevine, and we have 12 comments in there. And just about half of the comments in there are from our practitioners.
Really interesting. Was there a reason you chose WeFunder over some of the other platforms that are out there?
Yeah, well, they in the U.S. they were the most successful, but both of the people I knew, and maybe this speaks to momentum in anything, right, and the power laws that exist. When I spoke to my friend and my partner's friend, they had done their due diligence. I had found two or three others. I did some of my own due diligence. I talked to some people that had been on the platform, and the reviews were just the strongest for WeFunder. So I said, you have the most scale, the most number of investors, the greatest momentum, and they've made the process just incredibly easy. I made a comment to a couple of my partners who haven't had the good fortune of doing an IPO or raising institutional capital, and I said, this was so much more fun and so much more streamlined than institutional fundraising. It was just a pleasure on a relative basis.
If you're worried about the fulfillment and shipping part of your Kickstarter campaign when it comes to getting out all those perks and rewards to your backers, rest assured I've put together a complete Kickstarter fulfillment and shipping checklist for you, and it's free. This is sponsored by the folks at Fulfillrite, and they thought that you should have this checklist as part of your arsenal going into a crowdfunding campaign. If you want to get instant access to this checklist and it's free, you can go to fulfillrite.com/checklist. Again, that is fulfillrite.com/checklist. Fulfillrite.com/checklist. Just go to that link and you can download it immediately. You made a comment earlier about it being adversarial, right? Less adversarial than institutional fundraising. Like, I didn't exactly understand what you meant there. What do you mean by that?
I guess it's all about perspective. So I think if you talk to most venture capitalists, you'll find out that they say no 99% of the time, right? You just do the math. They've done. I've read a dozen or more posts on it, right? They see 1,000 deals. They meet with 100. They take 20 meetings or 30 meetings, and then they invest in 2 or 3. I'm paraphrasing, but those numbers are order of magnitude correct. So if that's the world you live in, you're almost looking for why to say no.
Yeah, yeah.
And in fact, I think I've read that from 1 or 2 of them. Say, I'm looking for the reason to say no. And people that are investing 1 or 2 or 3,000 and know you and know the industry you're in, they're not taking that approach to it. So they're not trying to find the blemish, the reason to say no. They're looking to be convinced to say yes. And
Mm.
maybe that's just a perspective. But again, I'm using the words of venture capitalists themselves from the posts they make. And the math, I think, is also true. That just the number of deals they see and the number of times they say yes, it just would end up that way.
It's also kind of more like collective voting, right? Where you have all of these investors who are voting whether or not this is going to happen. Like if you're going to go to the next stage, raise this amount of money versus a VC, it's just a handful of people that are making that decision. So it's a little bit different there in that way as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's about getting people excited about what you're doing. And I don't want to say that venture capitalists are cynical, but if you just look at that math, you see 1,000 deals you invest in, let's say you invest in 10, and they'll even say to you, I'm looking for 1 or 2 to return the fund, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, to be big home runs. So they fully expect 6 or 7 of them to not work. So they're just doing that math in their head all the time. Like, I have to find the mistake with this business or this team or this idea or this timing or whatever. And it's just adversarial is probably too strong a word, but it's laborious in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's
Mm-hmm.
different later stage because you've now proven product market fit, you've de-risked it. And so that's what I would say. What I love about the WeFunders, and maybe one day WeFunder will be able to source hundreds of millions that they're not legally allowed to, I don't believe right now.
Not right now, no.
Yeah.
Maybe in the future, yeah.
Maybe in the future. But so to me, it's like a perfect match. If you can get it down to a small capital need and use WeFunder platform, it's exciting. You give smaller investors the opportunity to participate. With there's definitely risk. These companies not work out, but if they do work out, they can get outsized returns like professional investors with small dollars, and the entrepreneur can raise enough capital to prove that what they've got is something real.
You've participated in a few different industries now, right?
Yeah.
And you've sort of witnessed the growth of a company. You've been able to build teams. For you, what's the funnest part of the process? Is it when people are able to sample the product, you get your feedback? Is it the vision, the building the team? Like, what do you like most about the entire entrepreneurial process?
Yeah, I guess you'd call it retention. So you see a customer who enjoys your service or your product. It's changed their lives is too strong a word, but it's like, I want to do that again and again and again and again. If it's a service, or I want to buy the product again and again and again. It's just so gratifying that you were able to put these pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together and people give you that validation for that creation. So I like to say there's very few ways in which you can touch the future. And I'm very fortunate to have 3 children, 2 biological and 1 stepson. And I love being with them and being part of their lives and seeing all the great things they're going to do. And I touch the future a little bit through them. And I think that's also true of companies or other things. You can do other creative things, whether it's music or art or whatever it happens to be, and you are able to touch the future. It's probably
You can really shape the future in that way, which is really neat. With your career, what do you think has made you stand out? Because a lot of other people, try to accomplish projects, they try to do different companies, and they're just not able to pull it off or even get outside the idea stage. What do you think kind of sets you apart, makes you different in the way you can execute on these things?
I'd say the first piece is intellectual curiosity. And people have probably said this 100 times. I love solving puzzles. And to me, creative stuff is just like that, is a puzzle where you're sometimes the pieces come from different spheres or different areas. So trying to bring like a rental model to medicine and finding the places it fits, that's to me really intellectually fun, just solving those puzzles. And then the execution thing, at the end of the day, just perseverance. I don't think it's just me, it's the whole team, but it's like persevering and building the team. So I like to think, I don't want to call it a religion or something like that, but you have to convince your first customer, and you have to convince your first partner or co-founder, and then your first employee, and then your second employee, and then your team, and then finance, and then you have to convince investors. So you're kind of selling, but the minute you get past a certain tipping point, they start selling with you, and it becomes this just groundswell of voices and support and people, and that's also pretty darn cool, especially once you pass that tipping point and it has a power and a life of its own.
In order to get to that tipping point with your company, this new company right now,
Yeah.
what do you think has to happen with Vansanity?
Yeah, I think we have to say let's get, I don't know if it's 50 or 100 customers in Boston that are using the service on a regular basis. So now we have 25 or 30 practitioners. I'd say about half use it regularly. And then you probably, you want your power users. Everything is kind of an 80-20 rule or something close to it, maybe even 10-90. But your power users are going to be using it 5, 10, 15 hours a month. And then the more occasional users will use it a few hours a month. But once you get to, like I said, maybe 50 to 100 signups and 50 to 75 of them are using it regularly, I think I'll have said, you know what, now for one area, we've proven this thing works. We're right at or close to profitability. I think we can take this and take it on the road.
I was looking through some of the grapevine notes that you have. One of them really interesting was anything Iggy is involved with is likely a smart idea. We wish we had more to invest, but Rob's practice is in a deep freeze at the moment. So it's like, it's so interesting to me just that people that have been watching you your entire life, going through these successes can now participate in it. And just kind of off of your own ability to execute that they're kind of investing.
Yeah, that's heartwarming that people have that much faith in me. Like you expect your mom to have that much faith in you, although I'm not sure my mom does. But it's good to have friends, former colleagues, and others who've seen me operate or seen me go through life and say, this person, they may succeed, they may fail, but it's going to be a good idea, and Iggy's going to give it everything he's got, financially, emotionally, physically, and he'll pour his heart and soul into it. And I can promise people that I will do.
One thing I didn't understand when I was looking at investing on the site, there's this thing called future equity agreement. Like I didn't really fully understand that. What is that?
Yeah, so a lot of times there's two basic things called convertible notes. That you're probably more familiar with those, where you basically are making a loan that can convert into equity at a certain price. What's safe is simple agreement for equity or simple agreement for future equity. It's very common now. It's been around 3 to 5 years. It's the simplest agreement. It's just a handful of pages. It basically just says, you're giving us money today. We don't know what the company's worth, but we're going to do two things to protect you as an investor. And by the way, I invested on the same terms as everybody else. So the terms are, in our case, a 10 million cap. So you won't pay more than 10 million for this equity as a company. And whatever price we get, if it's less than 10 million, you'll get it at a 20% discount to the next investor. So I'll give two examples. If the next time we value the company or price the equity is at 5 million, the investor will get it at 20% less. So they'll get stock at 4 million valuation.
Okay.
And if it's at 50 million, God willing, they will say, okay, we have two choices. We can get a 20% discount to 50, which is 40, or 10, the cap. So they'll invest at 10.
Okay, I see. So is it the right to then purchase stock in the future?
Yeah. You can't get your money back, if you will, but you just, yes, when we in a sense have a pricing round or a priced round or a new round of financing, they would convert into that financing, but at more favorable terms.
I see. So in a future point, if you do another round, just say in your rate, your valuation changes, a
Mhm.
person kind of reserved the right to purchase stock at this particular
Exactly.
terms.
Exactly. And they will get more favorable terms. So either pay no more than 10 or they'll pay 20% less than the future investor.
Okay, makes sense. Makes sense. Cool. Well, I mean, so this has been tons of great information when it comes to equity crowdfunding, when it comes to your campaign and what you're doing here. I love if we could just maybe, where should the visitors go to learn a little bit more about what you're doing on WeFunder? What should they type in?
Yeah. So it's wefunder.com/Vansanity, Vansanity. And we use that term and others have used it, but vanity is sanity. Um, One of my previous companies, that senior product I mentioned, one of my board members was a woman named Laura Karstensen, who is a professor of psychology and a National Academy of Sciences member at Stanford University. And she was on my board, and I remember telling her about this, and a little sheepishly, because I thought, oh, how is she going to judge going into medical aesthetics? And she said, as a professor at Stanford for 25 years, this is the best idea you've ever had. And I was like, what? And she was like, first of all, I love the characteristics of the business, and blah, 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 all that. I love you, but you have no idea. She said, when people do a treatment to themselves, whether it's just washing their hair and blow drying it, or whether it's mascara and makeup, or whether it's a medical aesthetics treatment, they do it. And the reality is 95% of the people they see in their lives will never notice it. I mean, if they don't shower, they probably would. But most of the procedures they do, even the makeup, they won't notice it. The reason you do it is to feel better about yourself. And he said, there's nothing more powerful in psychology and personal sanity than feeling more confident and better about yourself.
Yeah, that's totally true. So it'd be great if we could end here. Maybe you could leave the listeners with either a final tip, a word of encouragement, or something you'd like to pass on just from your journey.
Yeah, so I would tell people that, I've told this to several people already going out of college, go work for a young company, a startup. And people say, oh, that's risky. That's, what am I going to do? I'm going to be out of a job. I say, don't worry about it. The first several years of your life, you have to learn. And, the Army uses this, and I use it for startups. You're going to get so much more responsibility. You're going to see so much more about companies and different facets of it: finance, sales, product, technology, marketing, PR, the whole. As small companies, you see so many different things. You learn so many different facets. Even if nothing else, it gives you the perspective to make better career choices down the road. So for young people out there, go for that startup, that young company that really moves you.
Great. Thank you for coming on the show, and look forward to your remaining success here.
All right, thanks, Salvador, for your time today and for including us.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. My name is Salvador Briggman. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast episode. You also check out some of the other archives we got out there on the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. But when it comes to equity crowdfunding, I was so freaking frustrated, man, about this industry, because I feel like the only people who have been putting out content are lawyers and are people that are in high finance. So they're really throwing out lots of jargony terms, and they're not really connected with entrepreneurs, people who are actually raising money and creating new products and services and putting that out there into the world. They're more like those investment banker kind of types of people who are just very disconnected and hollow, and don't really have a big say, I think, when it comes to creativity and actually getting customers and selling and knowing the risk component behind that. So I decided to put together the book, Equity Crowdfunding Explained, to kind of explain to you in a no-nonsense way how to run one of these campaigns. I get into also the terminology that's used very commonly in this industry, some of the more sophisticated regulations there when it comes to money under Regulation A+ versus Regulation D versus Regulation crowdfunding, and also some of the top platforms, websites, and experts that you should know if you want to raise money from the crowd with a startup company. So this book is really a bedrock, a foundation of knowledge when it comes to equity crowdfunding. I think if you're getting started, this is a great place to sort of make that first step into the world of equity crowdfunding. Again, this is a great way to get investors, it's a great way to get feedback, and also people that are using the product and evangelists for your brand. So that sounds interesting to you. Number one, go and check out Equity Crowdfunding Explained at crowdcrux.com/equityaudio. That link is crowdcrux.com/equityaudio, crowdcrux.com/equityaudio. Go to that link, grab a copy, an Audible version. And also, if you get a free 30-day trial of Audible, I think you get that book for free. The other quick thing I want to mention was that if you want to book a one-on-one coaching call with me, I also do online coaching when it comes to equity crowdfunding campaigns. So if you're interested in exploring this for your company, you're wondering how the heck am I going to raise money? How am I going to drive traffic? What do I got to do in order to get this thing squared away? And also in terms of my product, like what's the potential here? You can schedule a one-on-one intensive hour-long coaching call with me where we go through every facet of your projects and your campaign. I have no problem signing an NDA or anything like that, and really getting into the root of what is going to make this thing successful. How are you going to blow up on WeFunder, Start Engine, or one of these other platforms? I talk about all of that in these coaching calls. So if you're interested, you can book a one-on-one one with me at this link, crowdcrux.com/coaching. That is crowdcrux.com/coaching, crowdcrux.com/coaching. Hope you took a lot of value out of this episode. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Sal, and I will see you next time.